Somewhere, right now, a clock is running down. Not metaphorically, literally. Yours. You don't know the number. Nobody does. It could be 50 more years. It could be 5. It could be less than that. And most of us organize our entire lives around pretending that number is functionally infinite. There's an old practice, older than most religions still in use today, that does the opposite. Instead of hiding the clock, it puts it on the desk in front of you. Instead of avoiding the thought of your own ending, it asks you to sit with it, daily, on purpose. It's called Memento Mori. Remember that you must die. It sounds bleak. It isn't. Stay with me, because this might be the single most useful idea in this entire series. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the people who thought about death the most were often the ones who were most alive. To understand this idea, picture ancient Rome at the height of its power during a triumph, the parade thrown for a general who had just won a major war. Crowds, trumpets, the general riding through the city in a chariot, wreathed, worshipped, at the absolute peak of human glory available in that era. And according to a tradition that's come down to us through the centuries, standing just behind him in that chariot was a slave, whose only job was to lean in and repeat one phrase in his ear, over and over, through the entire parade. Remember, you are mortal. Historians argue about how literally true that detail is. But it doesn't really matter, because the function of the story survives regardless of whether the ritual was exact. Even at the single moment a human being was most likely to believe himself untouchable, someone was assigned to remind him he wasn't. That's the whole idea, in miniature. Not death is coming, be afraid. More like, you are not as permanent as this moment makes you feel, so act accordingly. The Stoics took that instinct and turned it into daily practice. Marcus Aurelius, arguably the most powerful man alive in his century, opens his private journal, the one we now call Meditations, by reminding himself that he could depart from life at any moment, and that this thought should shape everything he does, thinks, and says, right now, today, not as despair, as a filter. Seneca went further, telling a friend in one of his letters that a person should treat every single day as if it were a complete life on its own, not a fragment of a longer one, but a whole thing, finished at nightfall. Here's what's interesting. This isn't a uniquely Stoic idea. It shows up almost everywhere serious thinking about how to live has happened. Buddhist practice includes formal meditations on death and decay, used specifically to loosen a person's grip on permanence and attachment. Medieval European art is full of what's called Memento Mori imagery directly. Skulls placed on writing desks, hourglasses in still life paintings, portraits painted with a skull tucked into the corner of the frame. A genre historians call vanitas, paintings built entirely around the message that everything, including you, is temporary. Even Epictetus, who's often remembered, somewhat unfairly, as the philosopher of pleasure, built a huge part of his philosophy around confronting the fear of death directly, arguing that clear thinking about it was the only way to actually enjoy being alive without a constant background hum of dread. So this isn't one culture's quirk. It's something close to a convergent discovery, different traditions, centuries apart, arriving at the same conclusion from different directions. If you refuse to look at your own ending, you end up living less carefully, not more happily. I want to address the obvious objection directly, because if we don't, this whole idea gets dismissed as depressing. Thinking about death constantly, in a spiraling, anxious way, that's not Memento Mori. That's just fear, and fear narrows your life instead of clarifying it. If this practice made people miserable and paralyzed, no serious tradition would have kept using it for 2,000 years. The actual function is closer to what a deadline does to a piece of work. If I tell you that you have unlimited time to write something, you'll likely never finish it. There's no pressure forcing a decision about what matters. Give that same task a deadline, and suddenly you know exactly what to cut, what to prioritize, what's actually essential versus what was just filler you were using to avoid finishing. Death is the only deadline every human being shares, and the strange thing is, most of us live as if we don't have one. We know abstractly that we'll die. Everyone agrees to that fact politely, the way you agree that the sun is far away, and then it changes absolutely nothing about how we spend our Tuesday. Memento Mori is the attempt to take that abstract fact and make it concrete enough to actually influence today's decisions. Not someday I'll die. More like, if this year were my last one, would I still be spending it this way? That question, asked seriously, is uncomfortable. It's supposed to be. Discomfort is the whole mechanism. It's what breaks the spell of assumed infinite time. Here's where this stops being just old philosophy and starts showing up in modern psychology too. There's a well-documented pattern in people who receive a serious diagnosis, or survive a near-death experience, or simply lose someone close to them unexpectedly. Almost universally, they describe a sudden, sharp clarity about what actually matters. Petty resentments that consumed enormous energy the week before suddenly seem absurd. Relationships they'd been neglecting move to the top of the list. Work that felt urgent reveals itself as filler. The uncomfortable insight buried in that pattern is this: the clarity was always available. It didn't require the diagnosis. The diagnosis just finally made the abstract fact of mortality concrete enough to act on. Memento Mori is essentially the attempt to get that same clarity deliberately, on your own schedule, instead of waiting for a crisis to force it on you. This is also why so many people report their biggest regrets, later in life, aren't things they did. They're things they kept postponing because they assumed there would always be more time to get to them. The conversation they meant to have, the apology they meant to make, the pursuit they meant to start eventually. Memento Mori is a direct countermeasure to eventually, because it removes the assumption that eventually is guaranteed to arrive. So let's make this usable, not just something you nod along to and forget by tomorrow. Step 1. Build a physical or scheduled reminder. The Stoics didn't rely on remembering to think about death. They built in triggers. A phrase repeated each morning. An object on the desk. Something like, when you wake up, before you check your phone, ask one sentence. If this were my last year, would today matter? Step 2. Use it as a filter, not a verdict. This isn't about answering no and quitting your job in a panic. It's about noticing, honestly, which parts of your day would survive that filter and which wouldn't. Some things will pass easily. Time with people you love, work you actually care about. Others won't. The grudge, the scrolling, the argument you're rehearsing in your head for the 4th time today. Step 3. Let it prioritize the hard conversation, not just the bucket list. People usually jump straight to travel more, take more risks when they hear this idea, and sure, that's part of it. But the sharper version usually points at relationships. The apology you've been putting off. The person you keep meaning to call. Death awareness is often less about doing more exciting things and more about not leaving things unsaid. Step 4. Expect resistance and do it anyway. This will feel uncomfortable the first several times. That discomfort is not a sign you're doing it wrong. It's the exact mechanism doing its job. Marcus Aurelius needed to remind himself of this daily, as emperor, because the pull toward forgetting your mortality is constant and strong. You're not failing if you need the reminder repeatedly. That's the whole practice. One correction before we close, because misreading this can do real damage. Memento Mori is not permission for reckless, impulsive, you only live once behavior. burning relationships, abandoning responsibility, chasing every impulse because, why not? We're all dying anyway. That's a shallow reading that mistakes urgency for wisdom. The actual practice cuts the opposite way. It's not do anything, because nothing matters. It's be deliberate, because everything you choose to spend your limited time on is a choice against everything else you didn't choose. That's not license for chaos. It's a case for more care, not less. The Stoics who practiced this hardest, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, didn't become reckless. They became more disciplined, more present with the people in front of them, more careful about how they spent each day, precisely because they took the deadline seriously instead of ignoring it. Here's the strange part nobody warns you about. This practice doesn't stay sobering for long. It starts as a confrontation with death and turns into something closer to relief. Once you stop pretending you have infinite time, you stop wasting the time you actually have arguing with people who don't deserve the airtime or postponing things you've already decided matter. The clock was never a threat. It was always just information, the only honest deadline you've been given. Most people spend their life afraid of it. A smaller number learn to use it. That's the whole difference this idea is pointing at.